everybody. I'm delighted to see so many of you. This is really exciting. Before we begin, I want to introduce you to a few people who have made huge contributions to New York City's community mural movement, and we're going to see some of their work tonight. First is Sue Shapiro-Kia, who was the first director of Cityarts Workshop. Camille Perrotet, who is one of the four technical founders of Artmakers Inc. And along with Camille is Kristen Reed, one of the earliest Artmakers muralists, and Roberto Eddie Alessia, who was a long-time member of Cityarts in the late 70s and the early 1980s. Also, Marty Cooper is here, who has taken lots of photographs of community murals and is the preeminent photographer of New York City street art. Lots of other fabulous people here, but if I were to introduce everybody, I would never give the talk. So, if you would indulge me for 3 minutes while I refer to notes, just to set up the context. And then when we go to the slides, we'll let the walls speak for themselves. And I think at any time if somebody has something burning to say or add or ask, we can do that. Otherwise, I really look forward to the Q&A and some of the remembrances of some of our muralists who are here tonight. Okay, so, I don't know which glasses. Okay. Pablo Neruda, the great Chilean poet and activist who lived from 1904 to 1973, once said, "Murals are the people's blackboard." People notice the murals around them. Whenever I tell somebody I am a community muralist, they always tell me about a mural in their neighborhood or one they see on their way to work. They tell me when it was painted, they tell me when it faded, they tell me what it meant to them, they tell me when it disappeared. Community murals are an effective way to broadcast a message. Mysterious to us, the images in prehistoric cave paintings were meaningful to their viewers. In the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, illiterate people went into churches to see the frescoes and stained glass windows, and that's how they learned stories of the Bible. Starting in the 1920s, the murals of Los Tres Grandes, Mexico's Diego Rivera, David Alfaro Siqueiros, and Jose Clemente Orozco both revived and created a non-colonial art and taught people their history. In the United States, the murals of the Work Progress Administration, or the WPA, were painted in hospitals, schools, libraries, and post offices, most often offering themes related to history and social issues. So, community murals continue in New York City, their time-honored tradition. But what are community murals? They are a singular art form, usually outdoors, large-scale, and site-specific, and they reflect the social and political climate of their times and the neighborhoods in which they are located. Most importantly, they are collaboration between artists and neighborhood residents who have a particular message they want to convey. Residents play a significant role in determining themes and contents, and it's the artists who develop the imagery that convey the message. It is this interaction, which depends upon the mutual respect of everyone involved, that distinguishes community murals from commissioned murals, memorial walls, and what can be termed as artist-initiated murals. And that's what I consider most street art, whether it's aerosol or paste-ups, or even crocheted stuff that we're seeing around now. Community murals beautify, protest, celebrate, educate, organize, and on occasion, inspire action. New York City's earliest community murals appeared in Harlem in the late 1960s. However, it was the prolific and high-quality production of Cityarts Workshop in the 1970s and Artmakers in the 1980s that led to the Lower East Side being identified as the cradle of New York City's community murals. These murals helped define the mural movement that has energized America's urban landscape. The first community mural, or so it's considered, is Chicago's Wall of Respect, painted in 1967. But murals very soon spread to Detroit, and in the 1970s they proliferated to San Francisco, Los Angeles, Albuquerque, Boston, Philadelphia, and New York. The late 1960s and early 1970s, which I don't have to tell most of you, was a time of great political action. It was the winding down of the Civil Rights era, the culmination of protests against the Vietnam War, the renaissance of the women's movement with second wave feminism, the birth of the environmental movement, and the emergence of ethnic and racial pride. When we see murals, whoops, did I miss a page? Sorry. Okay. We're going to see the murals, which really can be considered a window to the unofficial history of the neighborhood. What's depicted on the wall often provides a depth of understanding that's equal to, and sometimes greater, than what's in the official records. Community murals reflect the mood and the hope of local residents. They call attention to neighborhood concerns. They chronicle cooperative efforts to address problems and convey pride in communal accomplishment. They commemorate historic events and honor local and national heroes. They express cultural identification and group solidarity, and they speak to ethnic and racial pride. Despite the passage of time, mural themes and issues are still with us, such as the lack of decent and affordable housing, gentrification, homelessness, slum landlords, and the failure of government to adequately address them. They also speak to the need for social justice, better education, and health care, and as well, current events and as well as the current status and critical need for improved community-police relations. These themes are often reflected in the mural titles, and the images that occur in these earliest murals recur again and again, right up to the present. They're easily understood as bellwethers of the times, and they symbol conditions that are still inadequately addressed. As the captions of the images, when the images we're about to see after the title, that's a bad sentence. In some of the images, after the title, there is an asterisk. That means the mural still exists. Unfortunately, there are not too many of them. While some murals last for decades, others disappear within 2 years. They are vulnerable to weather, to sun, wind, and rain. Walls spring leaks, and therefore they need to be repaired, and murals disappear. Buildings come down, buildings go up, also destroying or covering walls. And sometimes murals are lost due to conflicts and controversy. We might physically lose the murals, but it's really important we don't lose their memory. The title of this talk is Protest and Celebration. We could also use the words accusation and affirmation. The earliest murals in New York City are often referred to protest murals. For a long time, people thought we dealt with national and international issues. No, these murals really reflected local community activism. But we can use the word protest, but when we do, let's look at it. It's a really interesting word. Pro, to bring forth, test, to call to witness. So in the word itself, we have the idea of affirmation. And it's in a word we usually think of as opposition. So even in these early protest murals, we're going to see images of affirmation and celebration coexisting along with those of very much protest, opposition, resistance, and accusation. And as we look at the murals, we're going to reflect on the larger social, historical, political zeitgeist of the times. And we're always going to keep in mind that dialogue between the artists and members of the public, which often is as powerful as the murals themselves. Okay, let's look at some murals.
Let's dim the lights, because these colors really pop. And Jane, you're good with the remote there? Is that on?
Oh.
Let me turn it for you.
Okay. So, protest and celebration. Fists raised. There we go. It is one of those images we're going to see over and over, as well as others. In 1968, Sue Shapiro, Kia, was charged with creating a beautification program on Manhattan's Lower East Side, specifically in the Alfred E. Smith housing. The 1970s, as we recall, were a tough time in New York City. The budget, there was no budget, services weren't getting to lots of parts of the city. Crime, violence, drugs, it was everywhere, especially in Lower Manhattan, and the young black men who were frequent visitors of the community center there. Sue's goal was to find a way for young men to express the feelings of hopelessness and fear about drugs and crime and violence that they were feeling, and translate that into art in a way that would be beautiful by a bunch of kids who really had no artistic training at all. So Sue developed something that New York City is known for, and it's called a projected silhouette technique, where over a series of months, the kids did role playing, and they created vignettes of what life was on the street. They took Polaroids, they projected them with an opaque projector, and they created this mural called Black Power Anti-Drug Abuse. And here we, here we see our fist raised in protest or perhaps celebration. It's really possible that the two sprinters who accepted their medals in the 1968 Olympics inspired this symbol in the murals. What we see is life on the street. We see fights, lots of fights, but this is the most interesting section. It is somebody, it's an official being bribed by the drug dealer. Now, if you look at this, it's not an engorged male member, but it's a nightstick. So it was probably a cop. So right away we have our first bit of controversy and some censorship, because rumor has it that the PBA, the Police Benevolent Association, protested. They wanted the entire scene removed, but the offending nightstick was painted out and all was well. What's really smart about this mural too, you see that the colors are really simple And this was all painted on plywood and then attached to the wall. It's about 24 by 50 feet. Black power, anti-drug abuse. A mural that happened soon after also used that projected silhouette technique. It was directed by Jim Januzzi, and I would like to dedicate tonight's talk to him. And with Susan Green, and these were two kids from the projects that Sue Keok found, and together they had many long hours talking about how to create a public art program in the projects. But this mural is a little different because it was painted outdoors on the wall, even though it was projected silhouette technique. Scaffold. Probably about 50 kids worked on it. Kids would meet over the winter and the spring, paint in the summer. It was a very long design process to determine themes and content and then design. So arise from oppression. You can see here these images could certainly be from projected silhouette. But when we get over to this side, it sort of breaks down, and whatever was planned didn't quite work, so they started working directly on the wall. And that was a big deal, and the fact that maybe it's a little confusing at the right just makes it a lot more interesting. But we're going to see some of those images that recur over and over again. The chains, breaking out of a box, flames. Now, in the 1970s on the Lower East Side, lots of arson. Landlords torched their buildings. We're going to see other flames of purification, but right here, it's arson. Then we see this ankh. Okay. This was originally a cross, which completely freaked out the Jewish residents living nearby. So the ankh was changed, the cross was changed to an ankh. But you can see how we are rising up. I love these arms because they can be both protest and celebration. After all, one is actually punching through this building. So, there was a protest, and that led to the Jewish ethnic mural. And this mural still exists, and it basically was to show the traditions and the culture of the Jewish residents on the Lower East Side, but also to portray the struggles of the International Women's Garment Workers Union. And you can see some of those images here are some of the protests and some of the documents. Okay, so we have the Jewish ethnic mural. We're going to have a whole bunch of ethnic murals. This is one of my favorites, history of immigration, Chinese immigration to the United States. And it's sort of mysterious in some interesting ways. First of all, in terms of the history, we see the locomotive working on the railroads. There's probably some mining in there. And then we have these four heads to represent basically a Chinese family. But this figure had a passing resemblance to Mao. And we're 1972, and tensions between the Taiwanese community and the mainland China community are kind of high, so people are kind of freaked by it. It gets stranger in that these two advertisements for local whatevers are incorporated into the wall. They were actually there, so they're incorporated into the mural. But then the owner of the building, he hired a sign painting company to put his ad on top, and he looks like Mao too. So So that's the history of Chinese immigration. Okay. Jim Januzzi designed, and John and Alfred worked on this American Italian heritage mural. It's very beautiful. What I love about it is this figure here, which is, you can see how well this mural works with the architecture of the building, these kind of inset spaces. But look how the arms cross over into the adjoining murals. Very smart way, it's very smart design. I'm not quite sure what some of the other stuff is, so we'll just move on. This is the first environmental mural painted in New York City, and for many years it was the only one. The Destruction of Nature, again designed by Jimmy Januzzi. And basically it protested the lack of any decent government regulations to protect the environment, to outlaw practices that were detrimental to nature. And you can just see some of these odd shapes. Again, the flames, these are not good flames. The shooting comet that could foretell climate change, who knows? So here we have that. Okay, I mentioned that not many murals relate to national or international issues. But the exception is when a national issue actually has an impact on New York City programs. And here we have the impact of federal budget cuts on housing. So what do we see? We see the dollar sign. We will see more dollar signs with hands pushing back against this long line of sad people who have either been displaced from their homes or having a very hard time trying to find decent, affordable housing. Sound familiar? Okay, over here we have this family punched out through this wall, huddled on these filthy mattresses. And just to make the situation more grim, you have these dark skies rent by a bolt of lightning, and within the clouds themselves, another dollar sign. This mural could have been seen from the Manhattan Bridge from the subway. I don't know if anybody remembers seeing it. Okay, Ghetto Ecstasy Afro-Latin Coalition. This is where things begin to change a little bit. With Alan Okada, professional artists were brought in, but here it was just a little bit before. Jim was working with a group of teens on 4th Street, lots of gang activity. In fact, these 7 spears represent the colors of the local gangs. And I remember Jim telling me to get the gangs to agree on that image was not an easy thing. What they wanted to do was to show both African and Caribbean culture, and of course there are all sorts of things that are common to both. So what we have here are the pyramids of Egypt, next to the Puerto Rican flag, and Raymond Patances, who was considered a father of the Puerto Rican independence movement. He was a doctor, he was an abolitionist. You have the sun, you're going to see lots of suns, lots of rays, which are sort of like fire. You see another ankh, you have a ship which comes to the New World, guy playing the Congo drums, African, Caribbean, we have that. And then we have this mysterious figure kind of breaking out of this cage. So that's a very powerful, liberating image. Did I get everything?
Kwanzaa candles.
What's that?
Kwanzaa candles in the middle.
Do they have guns at that end? Anyway, it could be, you never know. All right, this one definitely could be seen by the D train going across the Manhattan Bridge. I remember seeing it and saying, what is this? Before I knew anything about murals in New York City. Again, Alan Okada, Chile, Arriba, Rise Up. It reflects the three local populations, Chinese, Hispanic, and English, that lived on the Lower East Side. You have a cross-section of a tenement building. On the bottom, you have all sorts of problems in the neighborhood. This reflects the railroads. I guess it refers back to the Chinese community. Here is an internment camp from World War II. I'm not quite sure how that relates to that community, but it is a powerful image. Okay, we come to the second tier, and we see these fat cat people and the fat rat. See the tail? Pushing against the wall of the tenement. People are kind of huddled up. Clearly things are not good in this house because we see this young man. This fist is definitely raised in protest. No celebration there. And then we see a woman giving rent money. Here's a woman giving rent money, and placed in a hand, which becomes an arm, which becomes the corporate octopus of greed. Okay. Then we rise up. Hey, rise up, arriba. And we get to people who have figured out how to solve the problems, and we see all these wonderful fists raised in celebration, communal accomplishment. Tessa, you know this mural. Another one of Alan's. It was meant to be a Puerto Rican independence mural. You see the Puerto Rican flag held up by 4 people. Notice that they're leaning back, which really gives the appearance of great thrust moving upward. This flag is a really very smart organizing form of nothing else that kind of goes up. And here you have city life, industrial life, agricultural life, leading up to these 4 people who have attained accomplishment. What we probably can't see in this banner is the name of the mural, Work, Progress, Education, Seeds of Progressive Change. It's in this banner. There is lettering there. We just can't see it. The original, as I mentioned, the original intent of the mural was Puerto Rican independence. So this is all we have left, which is Viva Puerto Rico Libre. There are some interesting people in this mural. Lolita Lebron, who was a Puerto Rican heroine. To Puerto Ricans, but to others, she was a criminal. She went into Congress sometime in the 1950s and managed to shoot 6 congresspeople. So she was in jail at the time, and there was a great movement to liberate her. Ho Chi Minh is there, Malcolm X is there, and Angela Davis. You might wonder what that is. When the scaffold was up, the Vietnam vets who ran the parking lot next door were really incensed that Ho Chi Minh was there, so they filled a paint bomb and lobbed it against the wall and got hose face. But the scaffold was up, so the artists were able to go and repair it. But then the scaffold came down for the dedication. Another paint bomb went up, and this time it got Malcolm's face. So, and that remains there. Right now, all you can see of this mural is this little corner. There is a building that is there. one of these new fair market value, buildings. So I would ask, is that building an example of progressive change? Change indeed. Okay. Puerto Rico Heritage Mural. This mural exists. It's down on the Rutgers Pool at Rutgers Street, all the way down at between Monroe and Cherry. What we're doing is we're looking at Puerto Rican history, culture, tradition. What we have here is, I can't see with them or without them. I guess it's actually in here is images of slaves coming in, the conquistadors coming to the island. You see a row of slaves here. But over here you see the Taino Indians, and when the slaves ran away, they assimilated into the local indigenous population. Up here we have Roberto Clemente, and here is just kind of an ice cream vendor, and there are lots of people there, and the Puerto Rican flag under a rainbow and under a sun. Cliches, but we'll accept it from Freddie because I never met him, but I heard he was absolutely wonderful. But here is another potential cliche, but one of the artists I've worked with, Noah Bain, has said that when a cliche is used effectively, it becomes an icon. And I think that's what's happening here with Women Hold Up Half the Sky. You have the Statue of Liberty in chains, hand raised in the air. Yes, in celebration, not so much in protest, but I think as a challenge. And what you see are women who are actually ascending up the arm. There's a stairway up there. They're coming out of the torch where these flames of purification are bathing people who have attained accomplishment. Another mural by Tomia, Wall of Respect for the Working People of Chinatown. Here we have another organizing principle. Instead of that wonderful flag, we have this really terrific dragon. And we have images of Chinese people coming to this country, working their way through different occupations, coming up to more through education, becoming professionals and integrating themselves into society. Notice the dragon breathing flames. Well, these flames do illuminate some of the pitfalls that Chinese society is prevalent to, and that is gambling. Okay, at the same time that Cityarts is doing these fabulous murals on the Lower East Side, there's another organization, City Walls, that is putting up large, abstract murals throughout the city, many of them downtown. The artists started working in about 1967. In 1969, they kind of organized under City Walls. Doris Friedman was the director of that. She went on to found the Public Art Fund, which this organization morphed into. She was also the first commissioner of what we know as the Department of Cultural Affairs. It had this really weird name earlier, and it was she who hired Sue Kiak to start City Walls. The idea was to relieve the monotony of the gray spaces in New York City. And artists would do these designs in their studios, and then sign painters would paint them. So right away you have this schism. Community muralists thought that this was cultural imperialism. The artists of city walls thought that community murals were basically were kind of ugly and brutal. There's some interesting quotes I want to read. Well, first of all, Mike Allowitz, whom we're going to meet a little later on, said, "When we make art in the studio, we assert our humanity. When we make art in public, we assert our existence as social beings." And in a sense, that really kind of shows what's going on between the work of city arts and city walls. Eva Cockcroft, who was one of the founders of Artmakers, thought that the city walls served as a cosmetic function at best, seen by local residents as cultural imperialism, which I mentioned. What did I do? Okay. And John Kennedy, in the New York Times, compared these walls to piped-in music in elevators. Forrest Myers wall still exists on Houston Street. And frankly, I think that today they fit quite comfortably in New York's visual landscape. So here are two, and here are two more. Now the one over at Mercer and 3rd still exists. That building rises 11 stories. It's right over a grocery store. And this is probably the most famous one of all. 112 Prince Street. I think most of us remember that eureka moment when we're walking west on Prince and realize there's something funny about this wall, because it's a beautiful piece of trombone. And it does echo the wonderful cast iron architecture of the front facade. This city wall is a little bit different than the others in that it was Richard Haas who proposed it. And he was very vocal in saying that he wanted to do work that fit within the neighborhood. So when people looked at this, they might begin to think about what is going on around them. Today, this mural is in terrible shape. It's fallen off the wall at the top. There's terrible graffiti up in here. There has been talk of trying to raise money to restore it. They probably would need to recreate it at this point. I hope it can get done. It's such a special part of New York. Another City Arts Workshop mural, wonderfully using the architecture of this abandoned building. Within each of the niches, we have an individual musician. Notice the blue ground, and then the green ground, and then the blue sky, which runs throughout, which ties it all together quite beautifully. You have the group of musicians on the bottom, but here you have a trumpet player. And doesn't he look like he's just getting ready to dance right down that flight of stairs? St. Mark's Bar and Grill. This didn't start as a community mural. It was really, Jeff Rawling was hired by the bar to create a sign, to create some advertising. But very quickly it did become a mural because he punched out the wall, painterly-wise, to create scenes of New York and people there. But over the 3 years that he worked on the mural, he painted people from the neighborhood. He incorporated some of the graffiti that was painted on it. The mural wraps around the corner on First Avenue, and there are even two panhandlers. One of them was Ed Koch, who was mayor at the time, and the other was David Dinkins, the future mayor, who at the time was the Manhattan Mural president. I wish I had images of them. There's a great story here. Those of us who work on murals are very proud of our overalls because they are filled with paint and they look really quite beautiful. Well, there was a bunch of people standing around watching Jeff paint, and they were looking down at his sneakers. And the Japanese guy looked at Jeff and he said, "How much?" And Jeff was thinking, "Ooh, fashion icon here. Who knew?" So he turns to him and said, "How much you got?" So the guy literally took out his wallet, counted the money, and gave him $60, which paid for Jeff's rent that month. So that was a pretty good deal. Okay, these are not community murals on the Houston Bowery wall, but they are so much a part of the community. I wanted to show them to you. The first one was Keith Haring's work in 1982, and it was recreated in 2008. Marty, do you know if this is the original or the,
You know, L.A. too.
I couldn't quite tell.
When I first saw this, I thought it was a repeated, but no, I think it would be the original.
Because
I
the
think it's
original, okay. And the new one didn't have all the graffiti at the top, but it was just the figures on
L.A.
the
2
line.
came and hit it.
Yeah, well, there was a lot of
it.
it.
A little differently.
Right. And this is one of the most recent ones by Ron English. We're going to see another work of his. And if you look at this little figure right there, that is our friend Marty Cooper walking across the street.
But I want you to know that there's a casing over this wall. You can see the original wall was cut off at the upper left-hand corner.
Uh-huh.
The bottom wall, which some people, it is the same wall, but the same wall is underneath it.
Oh, so they've,
And this wall, the bottom one is bigger now. They
Okay.
extended it
okay.
at the top and the sides.
And this is a mural that gets changed every 3 or 4 months. So it's really fun to go down, and you might catch it being painted, or you might catch a dedication, or you might even catch Marty there documenting it. There was an exchange between Cityarts Workshop and Chicago. Eddie was telling me that he went out to Chicago with a couple of artists, met with the people there to learn how they were doing things. And John Pittman Weber came to New York to create from one generation to another, La Lucha Continua. His titles were always half English, half Spanish. He worked with cast concrete covered by stucco, and then he would scratch it. It's called sgraffito. So you would get the images of the, underneath. And it was just really honoring this community. It was an Afro-Cuban, Afro-Latin community. And you see people here, you see some of the documents. This seems to be a map of the Lower East Side, and then the sun. There was also a column at this other end of the garden, and I think that, if memory serves, and Sue, maybe you can, or Eddie, you might know, I think it had to do with the Vietnam, a guy who fought in Vietnam, but it could be wrong. Maybe I made it up, who knows? And this mural is still there. Although the garden itself is half the size because the garden was developed in one of these nasty land swaps, more of which I will tell you. Okay, Freddie, who did the Puerto Rican Heritage Mural, did La Plaza Cultural Mural in 1977. We see an African, Chinese, and Latino man, descendants of original immigrants. We see some of the transportation of how they got here. You see ships, And look at this beautiful train draped around the Chinese man's neck to represent the work on the railroad. And we see lots of other images representing cultural traditions of the native lands. So we see the lion, we see some little villages, I think we see a pyramid in there. And this is on the shoulder. That's the wall of El Moro, which is the big fortress in San Juan, thank you. And these are the mountains that kind of cut through the Cordillera of Puerto Rico. And of course you see the wonderful dragon and the sun. Okay, just keep this shape in mind because the wall sprang a leak. It was covered with tar, probably in the early 80s. And then in 1985, voila. Okay, Artmakers was established in 1983. And this is La Lucha Continua, which was a mural park, which was bounded by 8th Street, 9th Street, and Avenue C. In addition to this one collective mural where 12 people worked, there were 25 individual murals. Most were painted in 1985, 2 were painted in 1986. There were 5 themes that were addressed: gentrification, community police relations, U.S. covert intervention in Latin America, anti-apartheid issues, and the emergence of women. And the way it worked, that from any one vantage point in the garden, you could see a mural with each of these themes. I'm going to show you a map in a moment. What I want to and we're going to see many of these murals as well. But murals went around the corner. You see a building here. They went along here. And then I'll show you where the others were too. Okay, murals are interesting in the way they're organized. Often bad stuff is at the bottom, and then it works up to good stuff at the top. Here, which is usually the case, you have the bad stuff on the left. Look down here, there's another octopus. And then you have a derrick coming out of the car, demolishing a building. You have people being evicted, you have people homeless. Bad stuff. But on this side, you have good things that can happen in the neighborhood. A nice vegetable market, there's sweat equity. But what's really nice, let's see if I can find it. You see that? That's a scaffold. And on that scaffold are 2 muralists. And what they are doing are painting the African woman, the Chinese man, and the Latino guy from this mural have been referenced here. And here we have the crystal ball, which again is, all the good things that can happen. People working together. I'm going to show you the murals that are on the bottom. What we don't have a scan of is this mural by Cliff Joseph, which was against apartheid policies in South Africa. Okay, so here's a map of La Lucha. We saw the collective mural and the 5 at the bottom. There's a mural around the corner, as I mentioned. The murals all along here, along this building, and even over here. If you know La Plaza Cultural, in the middle is that wonderful amphitheater, and there's a garden around. In 1984, this garden was a farmer show. It was originally established in 1977. It was filled with drugs. It was really, really bad. And the idea was, let's see if we can take back the community. Artmakers was working with Charis over on East 9th Street. And here are some of the murals. Well, here is Eva Cockcroft looking at a plan of the collective mural. with a very young and very beautiful and braless Camille Perrotin. And over here is the dedication ceremony that November. Okay. Couldn't resist. All right, here we have Route of Lower East Side. Not for sale, not gentrification. But what's really interesting, look at this stop sign, which is perfect in this mural, but it was also there, and there was a dog cage. The artist had to work with a lot of weird architectural strangeness. You have these kids, playing, and the idea is, let's save our community. What you see along the borders and the frames is the words La Lucha Continua, the struggle continues, in many, many different languages. Russian, Chinese, French,
And
English,
Polish?
Spanish. Maybe, I don't know.
Because like, the Polish and Ukrainians, they are all joining together way back to like the late 80s towards the 90s.
Well, that's probably true because there is a Russian-Polish,
And
Ukrainian-Polish community on the Lower East Side. We all eat in the restaurants. Okay, protesting. So lots of signs, people either marching or arresting, because that's how it works in a protest. The octopus representing corporate greed, very jauntily dressed in the red, white, and blue stars and stripes. And then this anti-police brutality mural, which is not so much a cop confronting a protester, but there was a national housing demonstration, and at City Hall, this guy had been knocked down by the horse. So this guy is jumping to stop the cop from doing any more damage. What I find so strong about this mural, just take a look at the neck and
It's a gun.
it's a gun. It's a gun. Okay, Michael Stewart was a local graffiti artist arrested by the transit cops, and somehow he died in interrogation. So we have two murals. This was a big deal in 1985. He died in 1983. Chico, the graffiti artist, aerosol artist whose work was all over the city, all over the village, did this tribute to Michael Stewart. Here's Michael spraying. And then A.T.N. Lee did this really wonderful cartoon panel that kind of shows Lower East Side life. Here's, the train. Here is, it's hard to see here, this is the arrest. It looks like cops are kicking him. And then this looks like a morgue to me. We've never located A.T.N., so I'm not quite sure exactly what's going on. And this is to the memory of Michael Stewart. And this is Camille's piece, Liberty, Equality, Solidarity. These young children playing with a blue ball on a yellow background with the words in many different languages. And for those of you who like acrostics or acronyms, Liberty, Equality, Solidarity, L.E.S, Lower East Side. Women's issues were a theme, so here we have Nicaragua. For the women of South Africa, the lower, Latin America, and the Lower East Side. For the freedom of South Africa. Life among the ruins, made with these very beautiful pottery shards, really referencing the local Latin and Central American culture that is reminiscent of the people of the neighborhood. And Sueño, which is the Vegiganti mask, which people use during the celebrations to ward off evil spirits and the Puerto Rican symbols. And this mural is kind of interesting in that it protests U.S. covert intervention in Latin America. And the idea is, despite that, people manage to carry on artistic and cultural traditions. So there's music and art. You see the pig, military guy, pointing his finger to Latin America on the globe. This is a film strip which represents how people got their news, but to me it looks like a row of open coffins. And the artist incorporated some of the graffiti that they found on the wall when they came. The idea was to create sort of a pentimento, but the idea of history that's kind of carried on. Immigration, Eva and Joe in 1986 did the border. And here is, she is one, but one of many. And we're going to end with The Last Judgment by Robin Michaels and Kristen Reed, who's with us tonight. Two women with very different styles decided, let's go with our own styles, and they created the most interesting mural. Lucy Lepard only had wonderful things to say about it, the great art critic. So what we have down here on this kind of chartreuse green are these guys in suits, in sunglasses, representing arms merchants. And up here we have a panel of judges. Daniel Ortega, who was a good guy back in 1985, Nelson Mandela, and other people from the neighborhood. It was really kind of interesting because there was a protest. It turned out that one of the guys was a local landlord, and he had recently just evicted a bunch of people. So that was a little dicey for a while. Okay, the next year, Kristen and Robin painted the Enchanted Garden mural. As Robin said, a little bit of Italianate architecture filtered through the Puerto Rican experience. If you go out west, you're going to see lots of versions of Guadalupe's and lots of Mexican imagery. You come to New York and you're going to see Cini's painting, Mantegna, Raphael. It's really kind of weird. I think we just all love Italian painting. What I think is really kind of wonderful is that this very real casita, which is Puerto Rican vernacular architecture, is painted in these same wonderful blues and pinks as the arcade.
That's where we got the whole thing from that casita.
From the casita. Okay, thank you. Okay, so Mike Alvarez knows La Lucha, and he thinks, okay, I want to do something similar. I'm gonna reference some similar themes, but I'm going to paint a mural that is going to deal with revolutionary movements in Nicaragua, Grenada, South Africa, and Cuba, and also the international and local labor uprisings. He is a longtime member of the Socialist Workers' Party. So what does he do? He goes over to Pathfinder Press in the West Village, which is the publishing arm of SWP, and proposes this mural. and they say fine. It doesn't turn out fine, but let's do the journey. So we have this wonderful organizing principle, this printing press, spewing out pages on which are portraits of the revolutionary and labor leaders that are, whose works are published by the press. We have the March of the Fighting People, which are 100 portraits, smaller portraits. We have some vignettes illustrating these fights. The leaders of these movements are among the portraits. Across the bottom, we have For a World Without Borders in English, Spanish, and French. And we also have this quote by Fidel Castro. And if somebody can read it, because I can't see it. It's important to know the truth, and the truth must be told, something like that. People read it. Anyway, it was the mantra of SWP, but it was not what Mike wanted. He wanted an excerpt from Eugene B. Debs' anti-war speech, delivered in 1917 in Canton, Ohio. So that was the beginning of this conflict between SWP that wanted to dictate content. And it was this whole thing about not understanding artistic license. They thought that Mike was being frivolous. I don't think so when he wanted to include the 4 kids that were killed at Kent State. One of them was a friend of his. Anyway, Mike was eventually thrown off the project. What I did mention that there were 80 artists from 20 countries involved, which is pretty amazing. They would come, they would go. You can recognize somebody, some of them. You see Fidel, of course, you see Che, you see Malcolm. I am not going to advertise my political ignorance and not identify some of the others. But if we come over here, we see these 3 details. Eva, along with Chris, with Keith Christensen and Cliff Joseph, painted images in this mural. And here we also see Nelson Mandela. Again, we had paint bombs, and they were against Castro. What happened was SWP put an armed guard on to protect the mural. Those first paint bombs were in bottles, and there were swastikas painted on them, which it's hard to tell because the left and the right accused each other of throwing them. There was another paint bomb lobbed in 1991, and then in 1996, citing water damage, SWP just covered up the mural. But then in 2003, the party of Engels and Marx sold the building for $20 million to the developers, and now those 3 tall buildings on the river, designed by Richard Meyer, have replaced Pathfinder building, and of course those, in the first building, the first apartment sold for upwards of $5.5 million. I'm sure it's a lot more now. Okay, in the way that Pathfinder inspired, in the way that La Lucha inspired Pathfinder, Pathfinder inspired this mural by art makers when women pursued justice in Brooklyn. The idea was to bring a diverse group of artists together. Kristen painted Fannie Lou Hamer. Camille came in, she painted Cindy, whatever her name was, the one who protested at Crawford.
Cindy Sherman?
No. It will come to me. Anyway, again, it was an organizing principle, a lot of different artists. You see Shirley Chisholm on this beautiful horse, which is a direct steal from Uccello's St. George Fighting the Dragon from London. It's a political demonstration. You see hands, you see placards. In the placards are movement leaders representing civil rights, women's health, labor rights, prison rights, there are lots of other rights in there. Voting rights, Native American rights. So there are 14 of movement leaders, there's 76 activists, and then in this upper corner you have what we call the ancestors, the 19th century women who made it all possible. Starting with Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, who in her last speech in 1906, she was about 80 at the time, said, failure is impossible. Up here is a portrait of Eva Cockcroft. Eva died in 1999, and we painted a memorial wall, which exists on 3rd Street and Avenue B. Here's Eva it comes from a photograph of her working on La Lucha. Here was the crystal ball, and in that crystal ball are these two figures. I didn't point them out to you, but. So as La Lucha referenced Freddie's mural, we are referencing, the big La Lucha mural. Yeah, she's packing. It was an anti-smoking initiative in the office of the mayor. We're getting very close to the end. And you see this pregnant woman in cross-section. Baby in utero, you see a lot of cigarettes. It's pretty frightening. Here is the bottom of the mural, along with a mural by Chico in memory of Anthony, which was a local, a neighborhood person. Donald Kaposha, does that name mean anything to anybody?
Yes.
Oh, yes. Okay. He came in to do some development, which led to the destruction of 3 community gardens, and my being fired from my job as director of Green Thumb. But that's a long story. Anyway, the gardeners, who, inspired by the no smoking, actually created the Chico Mendes mural garden. And you can see the garden here. Over in here, you can see a little bit of, at the edge. Let's see, what is it? Here it is. Okay, and Mary Bethany. They sued and invoking the Visual Artists' Rights Act, and they won. They didn't save the rest of the murals. Here's another one by Ron English and one by Leslie Heathcote. But the developer had to move the facade of the building back more than usual. So that's why, we'll see this now. The facade comes to about here. This is another anti-smoking. You can see the cigarettes grabbing in addiction. This guy. This is on 4th Street, just east of the Bowery. And yeah, Forever Tall, the 9/11 mural, where the towers are filled with flowers. So, while the towers remain in our memory, so do so many of the murals we have just seen that are no longer with us, but we will always remember these walls who talked. Thank you.